The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Cristiano Ronaldo's apartment door like a whisper in the night. No postmark, no return address, just his name written in elegant script across cream-colored paper that felt ancient between his fingers. Special invitation, it read. Your return awaits. Midnight. Estadio de los Hombres. Cristiano had never heard of the stadium, yet something deep in his chest recognized the name. After 6 months of rehabilitation, 6 months of watching from the sidelines as his career seemingly slipped away, any chance to return to the pitch felt like salvation. The drive took him through winding roads he didn't remember, past streetlights that flickered and died as his car approached. The GPS on his phone had stopped working miles ago, yet somehow he knew exactly where to go, as if the path had been carved into his very soul. Estadio de los Hombres emerged from the darkness like a sleeping giant. The concrete structure looked decades old, its walls stained with time and neglect. Weeds pushed through cracks in the parking lot, and broken windows stared down like hollow eyes. This wasn't the grand return he had imagined, but it was a return nonetheless. The main entrance stood ajar, its rusty hinges groaning as a cold wind pushed it wider. Cristiano stepped inside, his footsteps echoing through empty corridors lined with faded posters of matches that seemed older than memory. The air smelled of damp concrete, and something else, something metallic, that made his stomach turn. He found the tunnel leading to the pitch, guided by a pale light that seemed to have no source. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very ground beneath his feet was trying to hold him back. But champions don't retreat. Champions push forward, no matter the odds. The tunnel opened into the stadium proper, and Cristiano's breath caught in his throat. The stands stretched up into impenetrable darkness, row upon row of empty seats that seemed to go on forever. The only illumination came from ancient floodlights that cast long, dancing shadows across the pitch. In the center of the field, perfectly positioned on the penalty spot, sat a single football. It wasn't just any ball even from this distance. He could see it was vintage, the kind they used decades ago. Leather panels stitched together with care, worn smooth by countless touches. It called to him with an almost magnetic pull. Cristiano walked onto the pitch, his modern boots squelching in grass that felt too soft, too wet. Despite the lack of rain, the air grew colder with each step, his breath forming small clouds that dissipated too quickly in the still air. As he approached the ball, details became clearer. The leather was stained with age, and something darker patches that looked almost like dried blood. His name was embossed on one panel in gold lettering that had begun to fade, but still caught the flickering light. Cristiano Ronaldo, he whispered, and his voice seemed to be swallowed by the stadium's oppressive silence. He reached down to touch the ball, and the moment his fingers made contact, the temperature plummeted. His breath came out in great white puffs, and frost began to form on the grass around his feet. The floodlights flickered ominously, casting the field into alternating moments of sickly yellow light in absolute darkness. That's when he saw them. At first, they were just shadows moving beyond the goalposts in distinct shapes that might have been tricks of the light. But as Cristiano's eyes adjusted, the shadows took form. Figures in football kits, their jerseys torn and stained, standing motionless in formation. They had no faces. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin stretched over skull-like contours. Their eye sockets were pools of absolute black that seemed to drink in what little light remained. Some wore jerseys he recognized: Real Madrid, Juventus, Manchester United, but the colors were wrong, faded and corrupted like old photographs left too long in the sun. The tallest figure, positioned where a goalkeeper might stand, stepped forward. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound like wind through broken glass. "Welcome home, Cristiano." The words sent ice through his veins, but he forced himself to stand straighter. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We are the forgotten," the figure replied, and now others began to move, forming a loose circle around him. Players who gave everything to the beautiful game, only to be erased when our time ended. "But you're different. You're eternal, or so they say." Cristiano's hand tightened on the ball. The leather felt warm now, almost alive beneath his palm. "I don't understand." "Then let us show you." The goalkeeper gestured toward the goal behind him. "One shot. Score, and you leave with everything you've ever wanted: eternal glory, unending success, a legacy that will never fade." Miss, the figure's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "And you join us forever." "That's impossible," Cristiano said. But even as the words left his mouth, he felt their weight. Nothing about this night was possible, yet here he stood. The faceless players began to spread out across the pitch, taking positions that formed a gauntlet between Cristiano and the goal. The crossbar seemed impossibly high, the net an unreachable target that flickered in and out of focus. Choose quickly, the goalkeeper said. Others have stood where you stand now. Others have thought themselves above the game's final judgment. As if summoned by these words, the stadium's empty seats began to fill, not with cheering fans, but with silent spectators whose faces Cristiano recognized with growing horror. In the front row sat Pell, his skin gray as parchment, staring without seeing. Behind him, Maradona gestured silently at the pitch, his mouth moving soundlessly. Row upon row of football legends filled the stands, some recently departed, others who had died decades ago, and others still who were very much alive in the real world but sat here as if they had never left. But it was the last row that made Cristiano's blood freeze. There, barely visible in the shadows, sat his teammates from every club he'd ever played for. Benzema, Modric, Marcelo, all watching with the same empty stare, all somehow both familiar and wrong. "They're not dead," he whispered. "Death is not the only way to join us," the goalkeeper replied. "Some come through failure, some through fear, some through forgetting what made them human." Cristiano looked down at the ball in his hands. The golden letters of his name seemed to pulse with their own light, and he could swear he felt a heartbeat beneath the leather. His heartbeat. "Why me?" he asked. "Why now?" "Because you've forgotten," said a new voice, softer than the goalkeeper's, but infinitely more menacing. A smaller figure emerged from the pack, a child in a miniature football kit, face as blank as the others. "You've forgotten that football isn't about you. It's bigger than any one player, bigger than any one moment of glory." The child's voice was his own, he realized with dawning terror. His voice from 30 years ago, before the fame, before the records, when football was just a game he loved. "You've made yourself the center of everything," the child continued. "Every goal, every celebration, every record, it all flows back to you. But football doesn't belong to you, Cristiano. It belongs to all of us." The faceless players began to move, not toward him but around him, creating a slow, hypnotic circle. Their feet made no sound on the grass, but Cristiano could feel their presence like a weight pressing down on his chest. "One shot," the goalkeeper repeated. "Prove that you're more than just another player who forgot his place." The goalpost stretched higher, the net seemed to shimmer and fade. The ball in his hands grew heavier with each passing second. But Cristiano had never backed down from a challenge. He placed the ball carefully on the penalty spot, the same spot where he'd scored hundreds of goals throughout his career. The familiar routine should have been comforting, but his hands were shaking as he stepped back to begin his run up. The faceless players stopped their circling and turned to watch. In the stands, the ghostly spectators leaned forward as one, their collective attention focused on the single moment. The goalkeeper spread its arms wide, and Cristiano could see now that its hands were too long, fingers extending like spider legs beyond where human hands should end. "Everything you've ever wanted," it called out. "Everything you've ever feared. One shot decides it all." Cristiano began his approach, the same measured steps he'd taken thousands of times before. But with each stride, the grass beneath his feet changed. What had been soft and wet became frozen, then muddy, then rocky, as if he were running across the surface of a dozen different pitches simultaneously. The goal seemed to shift and waver, sometimes appearing close enough to touch, other times receding into impossible distance. The goalkeeper's form flickered between solid and translucent, its two long arms weaving hypnotic patterns in the air. At the moment of impact, time seemed to stop. The ball left his foot with perfect technique, the same technique he'd perfected over decades of practice. The shot was true, powerful, aimed for the top corner where no goalkeeper, human or otherwise, could reach. But as the ball flew through the air, it began to change. The leather darkened, the golden letters of his name fading until they disappeared entirely. By the time it reached the goal line, it was no longer a football at all, but something else, something that pulsed with dark energy and left a trail of shadow in its wake. The goalkeeper didn't move to save it. Instead, it stepped aside with what might have been a smile, if it had possessed a mouth. The ball passed through the net without touching it, without making a sound. It continued its flight into the darkness beyond the stadium, carrying with it something essential that Cristiano only realized was gone when he felt the emptiness inside his chest. His passion for the game, his love of football, his humanity. They were gone, absorbed by the ball and carried away into whatever realm existed beyond this nightmare stadium. "Goal," the goalkeeper announced, its voice now coming from inside Cristiano's own head. "Welcome to eternity." The change was immediate and absolute. Cristiano looked down at his hands and watched as the color drained from his skin, leaving it pale and waxy. He reached up to touch his face and felt smooth, empty flesh where his features had been. In the stands, the ghostly spectators began to applaud a slow, rhythmic clapping that echoed off the empty concrete, but their expressions remained unchanged, their eyes still vacant and staring. "You scored," said the child with his voice, appearing beside him. "You got everything you wanted. Eternal glory. Unending success. A legacy that will never fade." Cristiano tried to speak, but found he had no voice. The words formed in his mind, but could not escape through lips he no longer possessed. He was trapped inside his own body, a prisoner of his own ambition. The faceless players began to disperse, taking positions around the pitch for a game that would never end. Some headed toward goals that appeared and disappeared like mirages. Others simply stood in formation, waiting for a match that had been in progress for decades, maybe centuries. "The beautiful game," the goalkeeper explained, moving to stand beside what had once been Cristiano Ronaldo. "It continues forever here. Every match you ever wanted to play, every goal you ever wanted to score. But you'll never feel the joy of it again. You'll never feel anything again." The stadium lights began to dim, but the game continued in the growing darkness. Players without faces passed balls without substance to teammates without souls, all for the entertainment of spectators without life. Cristiano understood now why the invitation had felt so familiar. This wasn't his first time here. He'd been receiving these invitations for years, decades maybe, every time his ego threatened to eclipse his love for the game. Every time he forgot that football was about more than just him. But this time, he'd finally said yes. This time, he'd chosen pride over passion, and the game had claimed him at last. The last thing he remembered from his old life was the feeling of grass beneath his feet, and the weight of a ball at his heel. Then even those sensations faded, leaving him with nothing but the eternal echo of applause and the knowledge that somewhere in the world, football continued without him. In the morning, when the sun rose over the abandoned stadium, there was no trace that anyone had been there. The stands remained empty, the pitch overgrown with weeds. But if you knew where to look, if you ventured to the exact center of the field, you might find something unusual. A single football, vintage leather with worn stitching, sitting perfectly centered on what had once been the penalty spot. And if you were brave enough to pick it up, if you looked closely at the faded panels, you might see the ghost of golden letters spelling out a name that was once known throughout the world. But you probably wouldn't recognize it. After all, legends only last as long as people remember them. And in Estadio de los Hombres, memory itself becomes just another game that never ends. The invitation would appear again, of course. It always did. Slipped under doors, dropped through mail slots, left on car windshields like parking tickets for the soul. Other players would receive them, other champions who had forgotten that football was bigger than any one person. And one by one, they would accept, because the beautiful game must always continue, even after the beautiful part has been stripped away, even after the game itself becomes a prison. The stands of Estadio de los Hombres have infinite capacity, and there's always room for one more forgotten legend. After all, football is eternal, even when eternity becomes a curse.